So thank you again for being here. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Naiman. I'm the Director of Medicinal Plants Research here at San Diego Botanic Garden. And I've been here for about a year and a half already, focused on the Medicinal Plants Project, which isn't the topic of today's science seminar series. Instead, I'm going to be talking about the development of a sustainability plan for La Palma, which is one of the Canary Islands in Spain. And the reason that I'm doing this is that I was involved in a big group that we're going to talk about that actually went over for 3 weeks in July. And so people were asking me, why weren't you here? And why were you only responding to emails in the afternoon and night? And what's going on? So I thought I would just share with you kind of what's going on over there and how it's connected with the Botanic Garden here. So it didn't feel so far away from home. As you can see, they actually are the homeland of the iconic dragon trees. We've got our dragon tree grove and then the large one over in the Old World and New World desert gardens. So people actually recognize San Diego Botanic Garden by its dragon tree a lot of the time on social media and things like that. So I thought it was cool to be taking a picture wearing my SDBG shirt underneath a native dragon tree. So a large group of us ended up getting invited by many organizations, basically as a response to a dramatic change in the Canary Islands, especially in La Palma. And this region I'll highlight a little bit more later, but it's a beautiful part of the world with wild biodiversity, and people go there for mass tourism and for ecological tourism. That changed dramatically during the COVID-19 pandemic, as you might expect, and then in La Palma specifically, again, when this volcano erupted in 2021. And so it was the Cumbre Vieja volcanic eruption. Over here, there actually used to be a town called Todoque, which was completely destroyed. Large areas of agricultural land were also destroyed next to it. What you can see here are all banana plantations, with a few plantations that have been converted into avocado agriculture. So the Canary Islands serve to distribute a lot of that agricultural produce up to Spain and a little bit more broadly into mainland Europe. And we'll talk about those things a little bit later. So who was the group? I was definitely not alone. I was there with what is called the Global Sustainability Fellowship. Not really the Fellowship of the Rings that I grew up with, but a group of sciencey people coming from all across the world. So there were about 15 of us from, I think, 12 or so countries, 4 continents represented, and scientists, engineers, economists, all the way from graduate students up to middle old folks like me, and my friend Joyce, who used to work for Google in their sustainability section. We were tasked with putting together a vision for La Palma, but not our vision, actually the vision of the people. And so we were working with local stakeholders to understand what the real situation is there and basically devise a plan to help them to build back better. I think I just coined that term, so you can quote me on it, build back better. All of the organizations over on the side of the screen there are the ones that invited us out there. They actually put money in to bring us out. We didn't pay for food while we were there. We didn't pay for housing while we were there. It was truly incredible to see the dedication of the government, the tourist sector, some of the universities and things like that. So we're very honored to have this responsibility and privilege. So if we start kind of back at the beginning, we're with a group called the Sustainability Lab. We have to define sustainability. And I hate to read off of slides, but it's such a long definition that I'm going to do that for you just this one time. Sustainability, a dynamic equilibrium in the process of interaction between a population and the carrying capacity of its environment, such that the population develops to express its full potential without producing irreversible adverse effects on the carrying capacity of the environment upon which it depends. That's a lot. It's a mouthful. Major important points there. We are part of our environment and we impact it and it impacts us. And we'll talk about how we can visualize that just in a few more slides. It also means that there is an inherent cycle that we need to pay attention to. You can call it the circle of life. I think I coined that phrase too, where if you do bad things to where you live, you probably aren't going to enjoy living there or maybe not even be able to for very long. The Sustainability Lab is far from the only group that's working in sustainability. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, put together these sustainable development goals that are a little bit more commonly understood in the public perspective. And I think that most of us, if not all of us who are open-minded and forward-thinking, can really get behind all of these individual sustainability goals. But many of us also take issue with these in that they're siloed. You might say, hey, you know, here at the Botanic Garden, we work on climate action and life on land. But like, what about all these other things, and how do they interrelate? What happens if we benefit one, like life on land, at the expense of another, like life below water? So like, let's just take all the trash from the land and throw it in the water, and we've fulfilled 15. Okay, but what about 14, and how can it respond? And so the Sustainability Lab really works on this principle that we have to have a whole systems approach. And so in the very narrow scope, that whole systems approach starts with the population and the carrying capacity of where they are. But of course, we know that many different factors impact both of these variables. You know, over time, the population is going to grow. It may have impacts on the carrying capacity based on their activities, based on their needs. And so if we start to build up what we call a causal loop diagram in a systems model format, we add more and more factors and start to evaluate the impact that one will have on another. You need a certain population to have a growth rate. The growth rate is, of course, increasing the population through births. Large populations also have a death rate, which impact the growth rate. And so there are balancing loops between population and death, and reinforcing loops between population and birth, where the impact of one increases or decreases the other. That population then goes on to have activities. Some are going to be good and have positive impacts. Some will be bad and have negative impacts. And over those activities, they will impact the carrying capacity of the environment, which then has a response back on the population. So we can think, for example, about doing logging practices, which is going to help us to obtain some materials, make economic gains, and things like that. Well, are we doing it in a way that the land can regenerate, that the trees can grow back? Are we taking too much that the population is wiped out? So this is a very visual representation of natural processes that are in fact extremely complicated. And of course, the birth rate isn't only impacted by the population, so that starts to have other factors, the death rate as well, and this sort of turns into a big jumbled mess very, very quickly. So then we have to start to dig in deep and think about what are the specific impacts that are most important, and what can we call as a leverage point if we want to improve the situation, or what has been the leverage point that has brought us to where we are today. I think most of us would agree that where we are today is not a sustainable place. Over the course of human history, the population of the world has been under 1 billion people. In the last 100 years or so, with industrialization and globalization, we've gone to 1 million and then all the way up to about 8 billion and up to about 8 billion people globally now. That has come with extreme demands on materials, on land use for housing, on food, on energy. I'm part of this problem. I work best at night. But that is not what our world is supposed to look like from outer space, you know? And then, of course, all of the secondary effects that come with those activities. Are we polluting our environment? How much energy is lost at each step? And we recognize that the laws of thermodynamics mandate every time you make a transition, you're losing some amount of energy. There is no perfectly neutral or increase in energy that's possible. We can take energy from what we consider to be outside the system, so from the sun, or like Elon Musk is going to go to Mars and bring us all back materials. But in my vision, that just means that the system is part of a bigger system, and if we're not sustainable here, why are we going to be sustainable somewhere else? So is that problem just going to change, or are we going to change our mentality? And so the Sustainability Lab, over the last couple decades, has really established core principles of sustainability, and they focus around 5 different domains that all have to interact to have a sustainable development plan. And so some of those domains are very easy for us to understand: the social domain, you know, education and social services; the material domain, physical goods and infrastructure; the economic domain, which I think dominates most of our Western society, the life domain, which goes to be the living things, the biodiversity, the richness of the ecosystem, and then the spiritual domain, which is not intended to be, well, it's Halloween, so it's not the ghosts, it's not the metaphysical, it's our ethics, it's our morality, it's our reason for what we do. And if you're not incorporating all 5 aspects of these together, that means that one of them is left out, and probably another aspect of sustainability has been forgotten, if not abused at the expense of the others. So I got involved with the Sustainability Lab about 1.5 years ago. I learned about a project they have called Project Wadi Atir. The Sustainability Lab has physical projects in a couple different places, Israel, Costa Rica. I think there's one in Kenya now, and we're working towards one in La Palma. And so if you're not familiar, you probably are from the news these days, but in the big Middle Eastern region, there's this little country called Israel. If we zoom in, right in the center of Israel, you have a very large desert, which is called the Negev. And down here is Project Wadi Atir. And Project Wadi Atir is just outside of a small town called Hura that many people in this audience wouldn't be familiar with. It's a predominantly Arab and Bedouin community that had just kind of been there living off of the land, doing shepherding and things based on traditional practices that had existed for quite a long time, hundreds to thousands of years. And at the early days, built a partnership with the Sustainability Laboratory, the Jewish National Fund USA, which is a nonprofit that I participate in. I'm not fundraising here today, but I'm just telling you about something that we're involved with. And put together the concept of Project Wadi Atir, a sustainability plan by, for, and with the people that would help them to develop their home, which was really just a vacant desert by that time, probably different than it looked a few thousand years ago, back into something that would be impressive. So this is one of the first cases of de-desertification that I've heard of. This is aerial footage from 2008, just before the project started. And this is just a couple of years ago. So what they've done is to put in medicinal plant fields, to put in ecologically important plants, to start to rewild certain areas, as well as domesticate other areas. I mentioned that the Bedouins have been shepherds in the past, and they continue to be, and so there's plant material that's being grown for the herd, and then there's a dairy that's producing milk and cheese and other products there, yogurts and things like that. And I actually got to go visit there last December. It was December 31st. We were on a tourism trip. It wasn't an official work event, and some kids from the group were really excited about playing with the baby goats, right? I was a little more excited to see the fields and fields of medicinal plants growing out in the desert. These were irrigated. They were grown and developed with traditional ecological knowledge. The way that the Bedouin people have built sort of bulbous structures underground to contain water so that the plants above would be able to live long term since they don't really get rain in that region. They produce their own desert herbal medicines and beauty products or cosmetics. So I bought a bunch of those and brought them back. Colin said they smell too strong, so he made me take them out of the office. But I have them. I can share with you guys if you want. They're all at the top quality of these kinds of goods. So they also have an education center, a visitor center. They've established an actual school. They're teaching agricultural practices and sustainability, green energy, and everything else that goes with it. So it's truly kind of like an all-in-one that's there that inspires other people, and you can't just directly replicate it anywhere because everywhere is unique. Their plants are unique. Their needs are unique. But it can inspire people, and it does. So international delegates go to Project Wadi Atir. I think that the folks in the Canary Island were well aware of it before the Sustainability Lab got invited out. One of the social aspects that's there is on the far side there, sorry I don't have a laser pointer, is Lena. So Lena's the former CEO of Project Wadi Atir. She's a Bedouin woman of Islam faith, defying all stereotypes. The group there is multi-gendered, multi-religious, basically pluralistic in every sense that you could imagine. Across different age groups, it's truly an incredible place. And just in light of recent events, Jamila, who's the principal of the Project Wadi Atir school sent me this picture 2 days ago. This is an olive harvest that they had done with the community as a community event. They meet every 2 or 3 weeks across the entire year and do different kind of events for the community. And they said, this is an act of solidarity. Olives, it happens to be olive harvest season, so that worked out really nicely. Olives have historically been a symbol of peace, especially in the region. And the people that are there are Christian, Druze, Islam, Jewish, all faiths, all ages, working together to harvest olives. Olives are part of life, right? But they're also part of the material domain for the wood. They're also part of the economic domain from their value. Picking them comes from that spiritual domain. And I feel like I'm probably missing one, but they're all kind of wrapped up here together. Jamila is the youngest principal of any school in all of Israel. Truly an incredible person. And she was with us in La Palma as we started to advance through the different steps of our project program. So before going, of course, we had studied these sustainability principles through reading, through online courses, through discussion groups. It was actually intense in and of itself. And once we got to the Canary Islands, our schedule got even more intense. So I just show one of the days there. But on a typical day, we were working 12 hours from 8 a.m. till 8 or 9 or 10 p.m. So maybe even 14 hours. And then with the time change is just right in the middle of the afternoon here. And so I would get on my emails, I would get on my Zooms, I would take phone calls. So in July, that's why it was kind of hard to reach me, but I was still available. We still got a lot done. What were we doing in the first period of the trip is talking to the local stakeholders, the Palmerans. They know their land, they know their people, they know their problems, they know, actually even their solutions. There's a lot of amazing things that are happening over there. We had to understand that and try to formulate their words into a system diagram like I showed you earlier, and I'll show you a small one soon. And then work with them to actually evaluate what are the big leverage points, what are the urgent needs of the people, what are the long-term needs of the people. And sometimes those two things contrast, right? I'm willing to keep burning oil because I have an immediate need for energy, but I recognize that might not be the best long-term. And so, you actually have to devise different plans for short-term and long-term. Sustainability plans inherently have to be long-term. And so there can be gradual changes along the way. That's okay. But ultimately, we recognize there have to be some big kind of systematic changes. So the Canary Islands are down here off the coast of Africa, near Western Sahara and Morocco. But they're actually considered as being part of Europe. They're owned by Spain. They are administered as an autonomous region of Spain. Spanish politics are very strange. I learned a lot more about them there than I knew before. Interestingly, Canary Island politics are also a little bit strange. They have a lot of immigration that happens to the Canary Islands because people think once they get here, they're in Europe. And many of them actually do end up getting flights and things over into the mainland because you're in the Schengen zone, so you can just kind of go. There's also a strong military presence, but more so on some of the eastern islands that are there, closer to Africa. There's a large trade presence over on the western side as it connects in with South and Central America, and indeed North America as well. And La Palma's over here on the far west side. So they've had a lot of immigration coming in from Venezuela, from Colombia, from Mexico. Not so much from America, but when I was there, I'm like, wow, it's beautiful. It's an incredibly biodiverse place, and that is not only well understood, but also well respected. So the government, the EU, the local government, which I think was called Cabildo, and then Spanish, and then EU, and everyone else has actually invested quite a lot of time, money, and capacity building support to establish what is the biodiversity in each of these islands. And what I show you here is only for La Palma. So interestingly, the Canary Islands as a whole, there are endemic species among the Canary Islands. These, as I understand it, are numbers that are endemism of species only local in La Palma, not even in their neighbor islands. So as you look at terrestrial plants, there's over 1,000 that are there, but over 200 that are endemic and only there. That is out of this world, right? The situation is a little less understood with the fungi and the lichens, but tons and tons also of endemic animals, especially at the insect level. but certainly not exclusively, and extremely not well understood out in the marine world. So one of the Palmerans said, we live with our back to the ocean. You know, it's a mountainous, it's a volcanic island, so we're always looking in and don't think about that. So this has not been studied as well. There's probably a lot more, so I put a little asterisk down there. But incredible biodiversity, and I will show you some of those, but not just yet. Because of this biodiversity, over the last 30, 50 years, different frameworks have been put into place to protect and or conserve the biodiversity that's there. And so I think this was back into the 90s, if not even earlier. The European Conservation Framework came in 2000. All of this green space is actually protected areas where I think things are not being developed. And then the entire island has been established as a World Biosphere Reserve, which doesn't mean you can't do development. It absolutely does. It's encouraged, again, that economic and material side, but in sustainable ways and places. So the center of the island, let's see if I can just use my laser pointer since the table's in the way here. The center of the island where my red dot is sort of like a cauldron, where there's a historical, very, very ancient volcano. And all of that is completely protected area where people can't take materials, they can't build. It's a national park. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to go. And then outside, there's this sort of buffer zone where some things are allowed and some things aren't. And then outside of that, what they call the transition from the biosphere out into the rest of the world, which is where actually most of the population is living. So the population of La Palma is about 80,000 people. Historically, they've received 200 to 250,000 tourist visitors per year. And the land use for housing versus tourism versus agriculture is at least a perceived challenge there. For frame of reference, the entire island is about the size of metropolitan San Diego, so just the city of San Diego. All of the Canary Islands together have less landmass than San Diego County. So we're talking about a small space, very small space with a lot of biodiversity. Yeah, that is here. So the eruption started here, and over the course of about 3 months in 2021, like September to December, was flowing down this way, some paths were breaking off this way, and did a massive amount of damage. There's also a perceived controversy or struggle between the population and scientists, because once the eruption started, scientists came in and said, we estimate it'll last this long, we estimate it'll flow this direction, we estimate this is what's going to happen. And estimates are not always correct, and so the people said, oh, the scientists lied to us, and this and that. And it's like, well, they didn't lie, they were just wrong, and they didn't have enough data, and the data kept changing, so the deadline kept changing and the direction started shifting, and there's still, years later, people saying, like, I don't trust scientists. If you're a scientist, why should I listen to you? And I said, because we reevaluate, I hope no one there said, it's gonna be this and it'll end this day, right? Because men plan and God laughs. But that was here in 2021. All of the red lines that are shown here are actually the sites of more historic volcanic activity. This is a volcanic island, all of them are. The top portion of the island is like very, very historic volcanic activity, as well as parts of the bottom, and then all of this extra that's happening here. What you can see there is where the flows have happened, and of course we don't have a good way to predict this. We also don't have a good way to know where it's going to pop up with these mounds and vents. And so one of the historical eruptions happened kind of at the top of the island, and then lava flowed to the east. And what is well characterized about that now is that if you see where it's saying like kind of San Juan and Martin, it's even indicated, but a little bit small to read. The airport is up there, and the majority of the population of the island live nearby in the main city, and then over in Los Llanos. And so what happens if another volcano erupts and cuts off that path or goes that direction? Absolute devastation. It's the main port in and out of the island where fuel is coming, where food is coming, where everything is coming in. and of course where those agricultural products are going back out. So yeah, very interesting place with interesting challenges compared to what we're exposed to. Also extremely incredible. The people there are awesome. This is part of that national park that I showed you, and historically people actually shepherded in there. We think that the goats and sheep would probably even eat some of the biomass that's on the ground, removing fuel and things and preventing large wildfires. This is my friend Diego. I thought he was showing us a spear and how you could like jab something at the bottom of a crevice. And he said, no. If there's another big rock over here, I can like launch myself over. If there's not a big rock and I need to get down there, you kind of jab it into the ground and you can slide down it like a fire pole. And this is ancient technology. This is the knowledge of the Guanches. So the Guanches were an indigenous people. Spanish contact in La Palma happened around 1490, I think, plus or minus, and basically devastated the indigenous population. At the time, the practice was to kill the men or enslave them. They kept the women around, and so there is indigenous blood still there, but a lot of the traditions have been lost in the language. Interestingly, the Spanish say that the Guanches had been there for like maybe 500 years. You know, how can you even call this an indigenous people? But the archaeological record shows that it's more like 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 years, with the understanding that they had come over from sort of northwest Africa. But they'd been there for a long time, and the stories about what happened there are absolutely horrible. We don't even fully understand the context of what was taking place at the time. But it was part of the conquest period with conquistadors, and that leads to another interesting problem later on, because a lot of the land was given by the Spanish king 500 years ago, together with the water rights, which would passage down through their blood lineage. And so this is still a challenge that people face today, like who owns the water and how is that and why? But some of the Palmerans said, like, I've been here for 40 years and I still don't understand, like, you're not gonna get it in 3 weeks. So I'm still working on it. They're resilient people in the face of earthquakes, in the face of disasters, in the face of tragedies. The community comes together. So it's one of the great strengths of La Palma. And then also the willingness to shepherd in places like these, to farm on terraces up very steep mountainsides. It's not only challenging to build those terraces, think about actually planting, weeding, carrying crops back afterwards. Just an incredible, incredible people. So we started talking to those folks. Some of them were scientists and engineers. Some of them were just community members that have been living there their whole lives. Some of them were politicians, like virtually everything in between. And if it'll let me, I'll show you. They made a little video for us. There was a large public focus on what we were doing, so there were cameras around quite often, reporters that were talking to us. But these are locals showing us what they do. This is a marine vet who told us one of the things that they've been able to accomplish was the banning of sonar in their waters. And just that one practice had completely eliminated the beaching of whales. And because they have such a large naval presence, that saved literally thousands of whales' lives and helps to start rebuilding the marine ecosystem. We've got a couple of our biologists, people that had come in from the conservation sector. In some cases, we had the public together with the conservationists, and they said, we're not used to having this dialogue. They just tell us what we can and can't do, and we don't appreciate that. And so some of the challenges that exist in La Palma come down to education and communication, public participation. Maybe not so different than what we have here, actually, if we're being honest about it. So in each of these cases, as we're talking to people, we're all taking notes, we're drawing out the systems diagrams, and then we would actually put it on a board and represent it to them and make sure that we had understood correctly what they said. Because what you or I or anyone else might assume to be the case in La Palma might not actually be the case. And in many situations, it's like, you said this? I don't think that makes sense, but if you're telling me it, I believe it to you. Fresh water there is a bit of a non-renewable resource. So I'll talk in a minute about why that is. It didn't make any sense to me until we started to understand the facts that are really there. Some of the politicians came in and they also assumed what we were there for. And so they either came in very aggressive, like, I know you're trying to prevent us from building, or, you know, please support my initiative, and we're doing this and this and this. So it was really interesting for us over the course of these 3 weeks to learn all of those things. And we were sharing meals together. We were staying up late nights together. We really did become a fellowship, just, again, without that ring. Let's see, where are we here? Oh, the last 30 seconds are worth watching. Again, they were also recording a lot of this. Many of the presentations that we did were in Spanish, and so I was mostly useless. But we had Spanish speakers. We had a couple locals, I should have mentioned, that were part of the fellowship there. And so, you know, as reporters would come over and like, oh, no hablo español. And they're like, wait a second, you know, what did you say? But I'm a bad example of someone living in California. So, sorry to keep you captive during that bit of the presentation. When we look out at the beauty of La Palma, we recognize that, you know, there are challenges, yes, but there are amazing opportunities. There are amazing things that are already happening. We have to respect and appreciate that. I mentioned to you about water being a non-renewable resource. It's an island in the ocean. All of these clouds are coming off of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic through the trade winds that are blowing west. And so the clouds are basically constantly rolling over the top of the island. And the trees there actually capture the water in a process that they call horizontal rainfall. So it's not water getting dropped as rain in most of the places, at least most of the time. It's just humidity passing through and has to be captured by the biodiversity. So very easy to explain to someone why this life is important. But that said, it's actually dripping down through a very complex system and getting into an aquifer. And at some point in time, someone realized that a crack up in a crevice on the very top of the volcanic island was flowing fresh water. And so now there's tube systems and pipes that go and distribute from the top of the island all across the region, which is really interesting. It presents an opportunity for hydroelectric. It also doesn't make a lot of logical sense unless you understand volcanology, which I don't, and geology. But apparently there are large caverns and crevices of water impermeable, allegedly, rocks that they call, I'm losing the word right now, that you can drill into them and basically have fresh water flow out in very large volumes. But over time, they've been drilling more and more holes. They're depleting faster and faster. And some of them are starting to get salty, which implies that they're connected to the aquifer, which is getting salty because the ocean is sort of backfilling it from beneath. It hasn't been studied. It was proposed to be studied, and the water owners refused to allow it. So some of the same challenges, again, that we face here. In the life domain, 3 or 4 of us got together and really focused on biodiversity and ecological richness. I'll show you who that was towards the end. I meant to do it earlier. So we made, in quote, isolation, a systems diagram with some of the most major challenges and opportunities that are being faced in La Palma to improve or reflect on the ecosystem health. And again, most of these are really relating to the terrestrial ecosystem, because that's what most of our stakeholders talked about. But we did have people talking about the marine ecosystem, the problem of illegal sport fishing, the problem of water management getting dumped out, and things like that. The impacts of climate change there are dramatic and obvious. And so this is something that's always on people's minds as a long-term problem, but has to be balanced out, again, with those short-term needs. One of the impacts of climate change is the increase in wildfires. And as I'll show you later, we actually got to observe one, which was unfortunate and terrifying. And one of the things that is interesting about wildfires, of course, you know, climate change with drought, with heat, is going to increase the opportunity for fires to break out. But in La Palma as well, the abandonment of rural agricultural areas is increasing the possibility and frequency and size of wildfires, because there used to be a strong stewardship of the land, and now people are leaving those regions and going to the cities, either, you know, out of their own personal interest or sort of with a little bit of a push from the government, but their land is just being abandoned. So there's a huge agricultural space that's not being used there. There are houses that are just overgrown. in many cases, gardens that had been placed out that are now, just overrun with invasive species and things like that. And so, that's sort of one of the big impact areas that could be fixed or developed. One of the ways to do that is to implement conscious ecotourism, to renovate those spaces, to bring people in, people who actually want to work in the soil, people who want to, be surrounded by nature and not by cars and buses and noise and things like that. And so we used this to build out the vision, proposing strategies for La Palma. In each of these areas and in our systems diagram, we connected with the other groups that were working on material domain, that were working on economic domain, working on spiritual domain. Okay, so that everything is in fact integrated. But for this audience, I think we're really focused on the life side, on biodiversity. So each of these will be talked about here briefly. Developing a sustainable management and use plans for all biodiversity. This was really hard for us to suggest because they've already done it. But the people that are basically impacted by that didn't feel like they had participated in it. They didn't feel like they were even aware of what was being done or why. They just said, oh, the conservationists don't want us to do that. And so we really encouraged, in that case, a constructive dialogue to be opened. It's something that people talk about. We were able to start that even in 3 weeks, which was fascinating to take part in and to watch. And people ultimately came out and said, we don't know what are the criteria, but it's definitely not the same for him as it is for me, as it is for her. And so making that sort of consistent. No one has actually stopped to ask what is the carrying capacity of La Palma. And so we heard people saying like, oh, we have 200,000 visitors per year. I'd like to make that 1 million. Think about how much money will have come in. And they're like, yeah, that's true, but what about all the impacts that they'll do? And where are all their products coming from? That's also being imported. But like largely being left behind and filling up landfills or going into the, challenges like these need to really be calculated and addressed. Because what's out there right now is already awesome, right? I showed you a picture of this. These are Pinus canariensis, so canary pine trees. We have some of them, I think, growing here. They have a lot of different kinds of lizards, including endemic lizards, and I can't quite remember the Latin name on that, sorry. And then this little guy that I recognized just walking down one time, that's actually an Artemisia, I think also canariensis. And as many of you know, we have a big project studying Artemisia and a more local plant group called Eryedictyon. So they've used it medicinally just like everyone else is using Artemisias medicinally across the world. A couple of other nice highlights here. This is an endemic viola, Viola palmensis, I believe it was, which only grows at high elevation, only on La Palma. And if you go over to Tenerife, another Canary island, they have a different viola that's over there. I don't know what in the world that caterpillar is going to turn into. I chased it and got like 100 pictures, and I'm showing you the best one in my opinion. But it scared me. It's like so bright and so spiky, I did not want to touch it. And actually, it looks even more vivid on my screen than on this one. So Sarah asked me, and at some point I'll be sharing the PDF of this so that people can really get a good glimpse at these. This is one of their local and I believe endemic echiums. Yeah, yeah. No? I'm getting a lot of looks in the audience. I have like a wicked migraine, so I'm sorry if I'm misspeaking here. But you recognize the monarch, right? That's pretty straightforward, and I think it's a milkweed that it's chewing on. We had to talk about the invasive species, manage the threats from invasive species. And this, again, is something that people have been talking about doing, and they're doing it in isolation in the conservation area, or I do it in this region, but not, in the north, but not in the south. And what's out there is actually really, really tragic. I'm sorry to say, I'm an animal person, but this guy doesn't belong in La Palma. And it's a feral cat. It's not someone's house cat. And they just go out and they kill like everything. So they have a collection of the birds that they've killed. They have a collection of the lizards that they've killed. And the government said, well, we recognize it's an invasive species. We recognize the damage they do, but you can't kill them. So what they're doing is going out and trying to spay or neuter, which is great if it solves the problem in 10 or 20 years. We'll see. The cat's tail, which isn't related to the cat, is a massive problem. And so I took that picture. There were just massive open fields of it. And people told us, there's no way to deal with this problem. If I try to pick it, the seeds go everywhere. We're not allowed to spray it. We don't want to burn it because then it cause the whole island to catch up. And so the idea that a problem is too large to tackle is sort of paralyzing. but it actually has to be addressed. And we really worked to emphasize that to them. And then what's shown over there is actually a microorganism that's out in the ocean. This is what's causing some of the red tides down in like Florida and the Bahamas. It has no business being in La Palma, but it's been there. It's killed the whales that are there and some of the other wildlife that's out in the ocean. I wonder if it has anything to do with the imports and exports that are happening. So just something to think about. Meanwhile, the invasive Opuntia is now being threatened by an invasive parasite. So these little white fluffies that grow on there, if you crush them, they have like a bright red blood or sap or something like that. And so some people are saying like, well, we love the Opuntias because we like the fruit. Other people are saying, well, we like the parasite because we can extract a dye from it. And so it's like, how do you manage an invasive species that's causing clear damages but has some beneficial uses? It's a very interesting philosophical problem for us. The last couple of things here, valuing the marine ecosystem, right? Don't turn your back to the ocean. And so one of the things that we recognized is that there really is a beautiful space that's out there. It's being used for scuba, for snorkel, for fishing, for other things. If you did this in a sort of sustainable way, ecologically consciously, that would be amazing for the island, and some people are doing that. And so, you know, again, there are examples of good, and then a lot of people that are just doing other things. Again, the public came and said, we don't know where these rules come from. We don't feel like we're part of the conversation. I don't even know what I'm allowed to do and not to do. And so the same problems kind of kept coming up again and again. What does that look like? And I've removed the head of this guy because it's actually not the fisher. This was one of our guides. He said, hey, I saw that you just caught some octopus. Can I show it to my group? And he says, look, you know, you may think this is cruel or whatever, but, you know, our people really do this. We love to eat it and all these things. I personally just don't eat octopus because they're like too smart. I think they're going to come back and get us at some point for what we've been doing to them. But this is a marine protected area. You're not allowed to fish anything. And actually people are going out there with lines fishing. There were baskets out there and people were fishing. What I've circled on the right is where we were, but that's actually a water map of La Palma showing a municipal waste outflow in a marine protected area. They're not allowed to do that anywhere. They've got them in other places. They're definitely not allowed to do that there. And they recognize it, and it's illegal, and it still happens. So planning for and adapting to climate change kind of ties in with just restoring native plants, with protecting the ecosystem, with getting people to actually steward the land and use the materials instead of just letting needles and wood and stuff pile up, right? So make use of what's there, but do it safely. And that is actually an aerial photo from NASA from while we were there in La Palma. The smoke that was visible from the sky, I don't think this was even the worst day of it. It was just absolutely outrageous. And again, with that western blowing wind, once there's an ember, once there's a spark, everything can kind of take off. Using those abandoned rural areas, people said, yeah, my grandfather told us that fires would start all the time. But like you live there and you go over and you put it out. But now no one lives there. And the place is overgrown with invasive species that aren't fire resistant, things like that. So this has been a massive challenge. And then there's not a lot of science and education that's happening on the island by the island. So other people come in from Europe and they do a research project, you know, parachute science, but then they leave. And so we were saying, like, why aren't you, you know, collecting schools and laboratories and opening a research center and things like that? Because people here have been telling us this is needed. You know, why are we sending our young people to other islands or to other countries for education, hoping that maybe someday they'll come back, and then maybe they don't. Again, with the wildfires, this was me about 2 or 3 miles away. Maybe it was 5 miles that day. And the canary pine bark was actually floating on the wind. Thankfully, you know, not still smoldering by the time it reached us, but actually warm to the touch. Truly, truly incredible. And the entire skyline turned gray at some point. We were breathing it. We weren't so happy about that. We actually relocated from the facility we were at to another place for most of the next couple days while the fire started to die down. And I thought it was fascinating that they were helicoptering in water. I asked them about that, and where are you getting the water, and how efficient is it to helicopter in, and how much fossil fuel is being used for that. And they all said, you know, this is, it's important to show that we're trying. And so in some sense, it might be a political theater. In some sense, it might have been really, really helpful if it was focused on certain choke points for the fire. And so for the last thing, we really wanted to talk about the major opportunities that existed in La Palma that we saw. You know, excellent stuff happening in the north, excellent people coming in from abroad, excellent examples of accomplishments that had been made that just weren't really interconnected. And if we're the first people that are interconnecting these groups, like something doesn't seem right. All of the groups are connected to the government. So there's a very strong central government. And so like spokes on a wheel. But what you really want is all of them talking to each other, making that really nice, you know, interconnected web. The network, the laboratories, there's a big, beautiful observatory that I'm going to show you, a lot of foundations. Getting the citizens involved. Again, I mean, it's really all coming back to participation, to education, and looking at ways to expand on what's already been done. I mentioned to you the sonar ban, not the solar ban. Solar is an energy source that's not really being used so much right now, but could be. Before I go forwards, and really optimizing what's there, volcanology. People to come and study the volcanoes and the volcanic rock that I'll show you. Earth's magnetic field, which is like something that's mind-blowing to me, but apparently it's not the same everywhere and it doesn't change at the same rate. And like, why does the Earth's field change anyways? They've got the most major observatory in the northern hemisphere. I think the southern hemisphere is in Chile, and then the northern hemisphere is in La Palma. This is one of the major telescopes. It's like 50-meter wide or something like that. The lens is massive. They've got several others that are lower on the hill. We're actually here above the cloud break line, so everything above that is crystal clear virtually all day. They have outdoor telescopes for daylight observation. The indoor one is for nighttime observation. They also have what's called the law of the sky. So you can't have light pollution. And what's on the right there is not a filtered image. Their street lights, I think, are on the sodium channel or something. So everything's just kind of yellow, and it doesn't reflect as much. So I'm like, hey, we're in a black and white movie. Like, this is amazing. That was literally just us out one night. And the other thing that it's done, sort of secondarily, is it reduces glare off of windshields and things like that. And so there's less car crashes in La Palma than there are in other places that don't have this law. Like, that is incredible. What if we could do that somewhere else? But what does it mean to have a law of the sky? This is not photoshopped. I'll tell you the trick. We stood there very, very, very still. They took a long capture, which gets the stars. It wouldn't even get us. And then they took a flashlight and went blink, 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 blink. And that's enough light for like a 3-minute exposure to make us bright and visible and the Milky Way behind us. So not a drop of Photoshop here. Truly incredible. What would happen if we studied the ecosystem that way, right? So these are volcanic rocks. These are hard to find. They're important for scientists. And the public is saying, like, why can't I just break that apart and rebuild my house where the lava took over? And apparently, Earth's magnetic field is like recorded in the minerals. I don't know. There's a lot of resource that's here, not only the rocks, but also volcanic ash. So a lot of those pine forests really just kind of like contrast pop against the black backdrop, the green light, the blue sky, the white fog coming over. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. They've got cave systems that are volcanic tunnels that have been formed, which are A, awesome to visit, and B, really valuable for science. And I think there's just a huge, huge, huge opportunity there with the biodiversity. It looks like one of my pictures got lost, so I apologize for that. A couple of more of the plants that we found. I really love this one. This is one of my favorite pictures that I took over the course of 3 weeks, because I think that at some point, if humans don't become more sustainable, we're going to be gone. And plants like these are going to start to break through the cracks and take everything back to nature. So hopefully we learn our lesson before that and start to be more sustainable so that that doesn't happen. So this is the group not only of our fellows, but also of our local stakeholders, as I mentioned. A couple people that I especially want to call out. One's not in the picture, unfortunately. Her name is Lena. She was in Team Life and then had to leave for a family emergency. Berto, who's there next to me, kind of became like my Palmaran brother. He taught me a lot about their culture and a lot about their biodiversity, and at some point I hope to have him here and to visit him again there. And so the three of us sort of made the core of the life domain team that is really the work that I was presenting today. And then everyone else we were actually still integrating with and meeting with probably 1 to 2 hours a day, again, out of that 12 or 14-hour workday, just to make sure that we were all on the same page. We are putting together now a final document still, which proposes different projects that could be led by Palmerans, could be integrated from the existing projects we saw, or that could be instituted by the Sustainability Lab. There's even been some discussion about purchasing some property and doing a development there. So hopefully this is something I'll be able to share more about in the future. And again, all of our sponsors to get us over there, to take care of us while we were there, to work with us, to teach us. Everything that we did was to relay back to the people what they've been telling us they have and what they need. So with that, I will thank you all for your attention. I'll apologize for speaking a few minutes extra, and I'll stick around for as many questions as people have.